In this lecture, we're going to focus on understanding production possibilities and the production possibilities frontier, which really is a better way of understanding why we cannot have it all. The production possibilities curve simply represents that basic economic tenet that every action occurs at cost and that we can't have it all. If we're going to have more of one thing, we have to give up having something else. If we want more cars, the plastic, metal, rubber, labor, energy, they do not just materialize out of thin air. We have to divert them from other uses, and therefore to have more cars, we have to have less other stuff. Or to have more health care, we have to have less other stuff. And so think of something you really, really want. Something you don't have yet, but you really, really want. And then when you have it, you have to ask, why don't you have it? And the obvious answer is because there are other things you wanted. And you could have those things you really, really want. You just have to give up what you chose instead. And that you weren't willing to do at the time. You thought what you chose was the best idea, and therefore we're going to incur opportunity cost at every choice. And so an opportunity cost is our next best alternative that is given up in order to have something. If I go to the grocery store and I have to decide whether I want to buy an orange or an apple, that choice is going to incur an opportunity cost. I can only have one, and so I choose the apple. Well, the next best alternative that I gave up was the orange. So the opportunity cost of buying the apple and eating the apple was giving up buying and eating the orange. And therefore that would be the opportunity cost. It would not be everything in the grocery store. It would only be that orange, which was my next best alternative had I not purchased the apple. The other thing we want to keep in mind is once we make that choice, that next best alternative is foregone, and we can never know what the alternative outcome would have been. So for example, I go to the grocery store, and again I'm going to buy either an apple or a lottery ticket, and I decide to spend my dollar on the apple. The lottery ticket is foregone. That was my next best alternative, and I never will know if maybe I won the numbers. Maybe I got all the numbers right and I won a $50 million jackpot. Well, I can never know that. Once I chose the apple, that alternative outcome was gone. So that's really unlike the movie Sliding Doors, where Gwyneth Paltrow leads a parallel life, and we get to see what her life would be like as she makes one choice, and then what her life would be like had she made the other choice. We don't have that opportunity in our lifetimes. We make a choice, and once we have that other opportunity, that other option that would have existed is now foregone, and we can never know what that was going to be like. So let's start with a simple production possibilities curve. We can have either guns or butter or any combination of the two, and this is our production possibilities frontier. Notice that it's linear. What this is going to represent is a constant trade-off, and we will see this. And let's start with this mix of goods right here. We have 8 units of butter and 70 units of guns. And now if we want to obtain more butter, we have to give up having guns. We can't just materialize butter out of thin air. What we have to do is direct resources away from guns and into producing butter. And what we would look at is the increase in 10 units of butter was at the expense of 15 units of guns. So what we would say is the slope of this line is minus 0.67, and what we say is for each gun we want, we have to give up 0.67 units of butter, or for every gun we want to give up, we get back 0.67 units of butter. And that would be something that would be exemplified throughout this whole range on our production possibilities curve. For example, if we were to be up here, and we're going to have now 50 units of butter and only 9 units of guns. Now to increase our production of guns, we have to give up having butter. And again, to obtain 15 units of butter, we had to give up 10. To get 15 more units of guns, we had to give up 10 units of butter. And that's going to be a minus 0.67 change, and that slope is constant along that line. Now there might be a problem with looking at this constant change along this line. And the reason for that is what this is implying is that there's a constant cost to shifting resources from making butter to guns, no matter where we are on the line. So for example, if we were at the intercept on the butter axis up at the very top above 50, and we wanted to produce, say, 10 guns, or say 15 guns, we would give up 10 units of butter. And if we were way down at the bottom, say at the intercept with guns along the x-axis, and we wanted to increase our production of butter, we increase 10 units of butter, we would give up 15 units of guns. So it's a constant cost along that whole range, and that might be problematic. That assumes that resources are easily movable between different production sources or different types of production. Farmers who are really adept at producing butter are just as adept at moving into the factories and producing guns. People who work in the factories producing guns are just as adept at moving out into the fields and making butter. Well, that might not be the case. We might have people who are very, very adept at doing one task, but not very good at doing another. And if we move them from the task in which they're very qualified to the task in which they're not very qualified, we would give up a lot more of the good they're qualified in to get a slighter bit of the good they're not qualified in. So if that's the case, then what our production possibilities curve is going to look like is more like this. It's going to be concave to the origin. And so we can start with this point here. We're going to start with 30 units of 8 units of butter, 40 units of guns. And now if we want to increase our consumption of butter, we can increase by 10 units, but look, we only give up 2 units of guns. And what this implies is the marginal cost of obtaining more guns when we're down closer to the gun axis is very high. We get very few guns, but we have to give up a lot of butter to move farther down this production possibilities curve. And the marginal cost of obtaining butter at this point is very small. We get a whole lot of butter at very little cost of the guns we have to give up. And why this is the case is what we've done is we've shifted. If we're down at 8 units of butter and 40 units of guns, we've shifted a lot of workers who are very, very adept at producing butter and moved them into the factories to produce guns. They may not be as good at producing guns. We're also going to have diminishing marginal product of labor, which is going to reduce the amount of guns that can be made as we add more workers to a fixed amount of capital. And therefore, we say the marginal cost is going to be greater. We can look at the same at the very top. We now start with 35 units of butter and 9 units of guns. And if we want to increase our production of butter, we give up 5 units of butter and we obtain 16 units of guns. So now we're getting 16 more units of guns at the cost of only 5 units of butter. And that again is because in the producing butter were a lot of people who are very adept at working in the factories producing guns, but not very adept at producing butter. Again, we have diminishing marginal product of labor when we add more and more workers into the butter manufacturing business without increasing the amount of capital. Then output is going to increase, but at a decreasing rate. And therefore, what we see here is an increasing marginal cost of obtaining butter when we're at the top, or a decreasing marginal cost of obtaining guns, and as we move down towards producing more guns. Now, one last thing. If we are here if we want to move between these two dots, we give up 12 units of butter to obtain 13 units of guns. Now notice here, these are people who are easily adaptable or easily placed between one business or the other. Remember, when we were at the extremes, that meant people who were really, really adept at producing one good are moved into production of another good that they're not adept in. But there are a whole range of people who can easily be moved between, or different processes that can be moved between the two sectors. So for example, forklift drivers can easily be working in the gun factory moving armaments on pallets, or they can be in the butter factory moving pallets of butter. So things like forklift operators can easily move between the two processes. And there are many people who are like that, many different types of jobs that can easily be used in the butter industry or in the gun industry. And therefore, when we're in this mid-range, the cost is going to be relatively constant or fixed. It's not going to have the increasing or decreasing properties that we get at the end. Now, if we are within this production possibilities, at this point here we're getting 18 units of butter and 25 units of guns, we are not maximizing all of our productive resources. We're working within that production possibilities curve, and what this means is we could obtain more butter without giving up any guns, or we could produce more guns and not give up any butter. Any movement to that northeast of that fuchsia circle makes us better off, and we're operating more productively. We may be in this range if we're in a recession. We have idle resources like idle labor and idle factories, and once they get back into place, we move to a point like this where we get both more guns and more butter. Out here, this is an option that's not really available to us. We don't have the productive capacities to reach this, or at least to sustain it. During an expanding economy, we may operate up there, but we can't really sustain that for a long period of time. We might have workers working 12 to 16-hour shifts, factories running 24 hours a day, and that's something that's not sustainable through the long run. But if it's a temporary fix, we might have to be there.